is not just recognize Apartheid Week 2010, but I want to recognize the people who started Israeli Apartheid Week in 2005. It was like a long shot idea that I hear stories about all the time that has expanded in just 6 years to over 60 campuses. And I don't know if you guys saw it, but Al Jazeera English did a 30-minute segment on Israeli Apartheid Week, right? 6 years to Al Jazeera, right? And I'm really, really lucky because these phenomenal, phenomenal organizers and wonderful human beings are some of my best friends. They're my inner circle. They're my chosen family. And in Toronto, we are really, really lucky because they are like the pillars of this movement. They keep us all strong. They're like the glue that holds us together. And on an international level, everyone who's involved in Apartheid Week is lucky because they get to learn from the lessons of these like tremendously inspiring leaders who I just love so much. Many of them are here tonight. I'm not going to name you. Don't worry. I'm not going to do that. Lots of them are elsewhere. They've moved on to do other things. So Washington, D.C., Dubai, Montreal, New York, UK, Palestine, all over the world, doing amazing work, spreading Apartheid Week. So I just wanted to take this opportunity, because I got a mic on, to thank you guys from the bottom of my heart for building this and for keeping it strong. It is like, honestly, an educational event that has inspired thousands and thousands of people around the world, and it's going to continue to inspire people until Israeli apartheid falls. So this year, as we've been organizing Israeli Apartheid Week, of course we get backlash here and there. One of the themes this year, though, that's been different than in previous years is the queer issue keeps coming up. I don't know if all of you have seen that weird and honestly creepy Size Doesn't Matter campaign. I can't get into it right now, but needless to say, it's focusing on sexual diversity. If you go to that webpage, they're talking about sexual diversity in Israel. My MPP got up in the legislature and, amongst a bunch of random things, used LGBT issues to justify condemning Israeli Apartheid Week in the legislature. And I like to think that tonight's event, that Kwaya's enormous success this year, has led to this really big push. And we should be really proud of that, you know. And I think Naomi Klein opened Apartheid Week last year by saying you can measure your success by the amount the enemies throw at you. But what this means is that now, probably more than ever, all of us in this room need to be prepared to answer the attacks that are going to be coming our way, so we can clearly give our reasons for being queers against Israeli apartheid. So that's what my talk here tonight is meant to do. It's to give you some of the political framework, the rationale behind queer Palestine solidarity organizers, so that you can go out there and be empowered to counter the homophobic, the sexist, and the racist arguments that are going to be put forward by Israel supporters. So I hope that when we all leave here tonight, we have a really solid understanding of why queer people and our allies have to engage in this important struggle against Israeli apartheid. So tonight we're going all together on a little journey. We're taking a thought journey into pro-Israel logic around queer issues. It's kind of a thought experiment en masse. And so along the way, I'm going to present their arguments, challenge them, dismantle them, so that the next time you're heckled or harassed or even just asked a legitimate question, you can answer back. So the basic premise with which Zionists attack queer solidarity breaks down into kind of three very basic arguments. All right? We've probably all heard them. Number one, Palestinian society is inherently homophobic. 2, Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East and the only safe haven for queers in a sea of rabidly homophobic Arab countries. And 3, the linchpin here, queers worldwide should naturally align themselves with queer-friendly Israel against homophobic Palestine. So that's really it. It doesn't get much more complicated than that. So I want to look at the first argument. Palestinian society is homophobic. I can't disagree with that statement. There is homophobia in Palestine. Queer Palestinians do face violence and discrimination, and it is unacceptable. I oppose homophobia in Palestine, but I oppose it everywhere because it happens everywhere, even here. Queers in Canada, we've achieved some rights. You have the right to the institution of marriage, if that's your thing. We have anti-discrimination laws, pride parades all over the place. And many people, many of whom are here tonight, have dedicated their lives to fighting for these rights. But despite what Canadian nationalists want us to believe, we didn't get these rights because we live in the true Northwest, strong and free. It's not because we're enlightened, from this magical place. It wasn't a natural course of history. Social movements achieved these changes through hard work. People have fought and died for this. And anyone engaged in activism knows just how hard it is to mobilize people, even under the best of circumstances, right? It took a lot of work getting everybody into this room, let me tell you. So now, try to imagine organizing under occupation and apartheid. Let's talk about how hard that is. There isn't a single place on Earth, not one square foot on the planet, where a queer Palestinian refugee, a queer from Gaza, a queer from the West Bank, and a queer Palestinian citizen of Israel could physically meet together. Gazans can't get out. People in the West Bank need permits to travel, which are hard to receive. Palestinian citizens of Israel can't go into the West Bank or Gaza. And most refugees, well, they can't go anywhere, right? So queer Palestinians have nowhere they can physically get together to build the movement. So before we criticize Palestinian homophobia, how's about we look at the challenges facing activists there? And there are Palestinian queer activists there and here and pretty much everywhere. We need to ask, how can we best support queer Palestinian social movements? And the answer to me is clearly that we fight Israeli apartheid. Yeah, you guys can do the clapping thing. Ending apartheid is good for all Palestinians, queer and straight, and it's good for all Palestinian social movements. Queer Palestinians are oppressed by Israel as Palestinians, not just as queers. And we can't just choose to support them as queers, but not as Palestinians, or vice versa. And so when we're doing this support, and we're not freeing anyone, we are supporting a struggle on the ground, it's important to remember that we're not here to stand outside, all smug and upright about our rights, criticizing from the West and Canada with all our gay marriage. Real support comes through solidarity. And this kind of solidarity can and does affect change. So as John was mentioning, in South Africa, alongside queer mobilizing there, alongside it, international queer anti-apartheid activism shifted the ANC's position on queer issues, and South Africa now has some of the most progressive gay rights in the world. And the same can happen in Palestine if we work together alongside queer Palestinians through genuine solidarity and through supporting boycott, divestment, and sanctions. And you can see that starting to happen. So when John took the courageous step of boycotting the Toronto International Film Festival over the Tel Aviv Spotlight, So when that happened, the attacks on John were so personal and were so homophobic. And what happened next is really, really important. The Palestinian Campaign for the Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel, PACB, put out a strong statement condemning the homophobia of those attacks, right? That's a significant step. I know it was you, Rafif. A few weeks ago, Judith Butler, who's one of the preeminent queer theorists of our time, was guest lecturing at Birzeit University near Ramallah, all right? Judith Butler was in homophobic Palestine. And why was she there? Because she's solid on BDS, right? Why does PACB defend John? Because he's solid on BDS, and they're using their influence for genuine solidarity, and this is just the beginning of how we can do this work. But okay, so we're still on the journey. Okay, so we've passed stage one. We're just gonna, for argument's sake, accept that they're right. Palestine is inherently and always gonna be homophobic. Let's go to point two. We're just gonna, take that with them. So Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East and the only safe haven for queers. Now, I know I'm speaking on the second last night of Israeli Apartheid Week, so for those of you that have been around, have been here all week, you don't need to be convinced that Israel is not a democracy, it's an apartheid state. But I'm hoping that this event has brought some people out who maybe haven't heard that kind of politics, so just bear with me, I'm going to give a couple of key points about apartheid in Israel for anyone who needs a bit of convincing. So in South Africa, there was democracy, but it was white people only. And in this case, it's not white South Africans versus black South Africans, but it's Jewish Israelis versus Palestinians. And I get it. I know it's hard for people to understand Jewish people who have experienced tremendous oppression in the past as oppressors. But in this case, the Israelis are the dominant group. They're the ones with the weapons, the ones building walls, the ones violating human rights and international law on a daily basis. Now, the horrible situation in the West Bank, and especially in the past couple years in Gaza, seems to be more well known. But even inside Israel's internationally recognized borders, or 48 Palestine as we like to call it, only Jewish people can be nationals. Only Jewish people can hold full citizenship. Palestinian citizens of Israel are second class, so they're barred from owning much of the land. Arab towns and villages have inferior services, if any. Some unrecognized villages have no electricity, water, sanitation services, nothing, because they're unrecognized. In most places, Palestinians can't get permits to build, and schools and homes are demolished. And this is not just in the West Bank and Gaza, but inside Israel's internationally recognized borders. A law was recently passed banning teaching about the Nakba, the catastrophe, the displacement of over 750,000 Palestinians in 1948. That history, Palestinian history, is not allowed to be taught inside the state of Israel. I mean, pretty soon it might not be allowed to be taught in Canada either, but that's a whole other discussion for another night. And I think another jarring example, the one I'm going to end on, of apartheid in Israel is that all Jewish people, no matter where they come from, with no ties to the land, not a member of their family has ever set foot in historic Palestine, can get immediate citizenship anytime they want. But Palestinian refugees with deeds to the land that their family has owned and cared for millennia can't return, even though that right is guaranteed under international law. At best, Israel is an ethnic democracy. But if membership in an ethnic group is the only way to have full rights, it's not democracy, it's apartheid. But getting back to the queer issue specifically, so yeah, Israel has pride parades, they have some protection against discrimination, homosexuality is not illegal, but is Israel free of homophobia? The violent shootings, the murder of 2 queer Israelis in Tel Aviv last year speaks to a different reality. The stabbings at Pride in Jerusalem speak to a different reality. There is homophobia in Israel because there is homophobia everywhere. And if you militarize your society, you increase the violence. And that's just the way the world works, unfortunately. But okay, we're on their mindset, we're taking this journey. So I'm going to humor the Zionists for a minute, and I'm going to say that queers in Israel have a great thing going on. It is a gay paradise. But the problem is that none of these rights are truly extended to queer Palestinians. And I want to exemplify this by actually telling you a story about my trip to Palestine this summer. I spent most of my time in the West Bank, but at one point everyone's like, we're going to Jerusalem Pride. And I was like, I got to see gay-friendly Israel, so I decided to go to Jerusalem Pride. And so I left Ramallah, which is 20 minutes away in real life from Jerusalem, 3 hours in advance, because you just never know how long that 20-minute trip is going to take you. So the first thing you do is you take a cab to Kalandia, which is the major checkpoint between Ramallah and Jerusalem, and you get out of that cab and you walk through the terminal. And inside that terminal, Palestinians are being interrogated, they're being harassed, they're being searched. If you're white and hold a Canadian passport, like me, you get a dirty look, but they let you through. On the other side, you take a Palestinian bus, and there are separate Palestinian buses to Jerusalem. And as we're heading to Jerusalem, our bus was flagged and pulled over by the Israeli police. And they came in and took everybody's ID but mine, don't need my Canadian passport, went to their Jeep and sat there for 45 minutes, smoking cigarettes, talking. Came back on the bus, gave everyone back their IDs, and sent us on our way. Now, if I was a queer Palestinian from the West Bank trying to get to Jerusalem Pride and my ID didn't have a permit, I'm not going to Pride. I'm going to jail, right? So just in terms of like queer rights and gay-friendly Israel. But Canadian, I made it to Pride in lots of time. I'm quite punctual. And as you're lining up to get into Pride, you line up boys and girls. There's no third line. I looked for it. It wasn't there. It's okay. Trans rights will come next. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. And they frisked everyone. You get patted down on your way into Pride. And I'm not making this up. They patted down a soldier who had an M16 on his back. I don't know, like they were looking for smaller weapons, but he literally, he went in with his gigantic gun on his back. If I was a better photographer, I'd show you the pictures, but they're not very good. And as I'm going through this screening, I'm thinking, how many queer Palestinians are getting into Jerusalem Pride, right? And I looked around, it's hard to tell, but there didn't seem to be that many people who weren't carrying gigantic Israeli rainbow hybrid flags. The major difference between Pride Jerusalem and Pride Toronto is not the nationalism, we got that here. It's the soldiers. There were more soldiers protecting Pride than there were